Welcome to a new episode of Soundblot, the International Society for Rorschach and Projective Methods podcast. Featuring exclusive interviews, the Soundblot wishes to contribute to the oral storytelling tradition by taking ISR members on a personal encounter with notable Rorschach and projective methods experts. We want our listeners to hear our guests relate stories and discussions about their research, theories, practice, and collaborative experiences that have changed their lives and the landscape of the Rorschach and projective methods field. From history to clinical cases to the most modern research findings that are reshaping the field, our guests will answer our questions, teach, challenge, surprise, and inspire us. We are happy to speak today with a very special guest, Robert F. Bornstein, who we affectionately call Bob. Robert Bornstein received his Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the State University of New York at Buffalo in 1986, completed an internship at the Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse, New York, and is professor of psychology at Adelphi University. Bob has published more than 150 articles and book chapters on personality dynamics, diagnosis, and treatment. He has published numerous articles, such as The Dependent Personality and the Dependent Patient, A Practitioner's Guide, co-authored with Mary Langerak. When Someone You Love Needs Nursing Home Care and Healthy Dependency, and co-edited with Joseph Masling 7 volumes of the Empirical Studies of Psychoanalytic Theories series, as well as Scoring the Rorschach 7 Validated Systems. Bob is a fellow of the American Psychological Association, Association for Psychological Science, and Society for Personality Assessment. His research has been funded by grants from the National Institute of Mental Health and the National Science Foundation. Bob has received the Society for Personality Assessment 1995, 1999, 2002, and 2008 awards for distinguished contributions to the personality assessment literature, and received the Division 12 American Psychological Foundation 2005 Theodore Millon Award for Excellence in Personality Research. Thank you very much, Bob, for agreeing to this podcast for the members of the ISR.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So we would like to ask you to start with just tell us about your professional activities at this time.
Well, after about 40 years of studying interpersonal dependency, we've begun to shift over to studying dependency's converse, detachment. I'm actually amazed that it took me 40 years to figure out that we should look at the other side of this issue, but I guess I'm a bit of a slow learner. So my students and I are conducting studies at this point, right now focusing on distinguishing the core personality traits associated with schizoid versus avoidant personality styles. And it's really student driven, which is exciting for me. I love that. I have a student doing a dissertation in this area, and she's getting great results. And I had another student who did her master's thesis in this area, and we're hoping to present the results at an upcoming meeting, if we can.
That's very good, yeah. So it will be detachment as the other side of the coin of dependency, as it relates to personality.
Yeah. And it's exciting because it has implications, I think, for how we conceptualize personality pathology, both in the traditional way, in the DSM way, and also for the alternative model of personality disorders. And so we're trying to move into that area as well. It's really we're very excited about it.
That's very exciting. I can see how this is very interesting. Now, going now back to the Rorschach, how did you learn it?
Well, I'll tell you where I didn't learn it. I never, I don't think that the word Rorschach was ever mentioned during my undergraduate years. 4 years as a psychology major, nothing. I began to learn about the Rorschach in graduate school, but really it was during internship at Upstate Medical Center that I received what I would think of as my training in the Rorschach. And since then, and this was back in the mid 1980s. Since then, truthfully, a lot of what I've learned about the Rorschach has come from meetings, the Society for Personality Assessment and the Rorschach Society is where I've learned about it.
Mhm, mhm. But a lot of people learn it in their internship or in the school, but then quickly abandon it because it's hard, it's hard work, it's complicated, it's expensive to in terms of when you use it for assessment, right?
Yeah.
But do you see that it has a place in a personality assessment? Do you think that it has uh, it adds something when used with other evaluative instruments?
Well, I think it's crucial for personality assessment, and I think it's crucial to use I would favor the Rorschach, but truly, a performance-based measure. I believe the Rorschach is probably the best validated performance-based measure that we have to complement our self-report data that emerges during an assessment uh, to obtain a more complete picture of the patient. And my thinking on the utility of the Rorschach and personality assessment really centers on incremental validity, that Rorschach data yields something unique that no self-report measure will provide. And in addition, or I should say, following that way of thinking, my my sense of the optimal use of the Rorschach in personality assessment is to contrast Rorschach results or contrast performance-based test results with those that are obtained using more traditional self-report measures, not necessarily expecting to find convergent outcomes, but looking for places where Rorschach data contrast with self-report data, and that's where the incremental validity lies.
Right, right. And how much time do you have to teach your students about this way of using the data in a way that will, compare and contrast and really be able to create a more layer, and complex dimension of a person's functioning?
I do try to bring students along in that way of thinking, and I use I talk about the Rorschach in every course I teach. All of my courses at this point are in personality and personality assessment, so it's an easy fit. But I talk about the Rorschach in my undergraduate classes. I talk about the Rorschach in my master's classes. I talk about the Rorschach in my doctoral classes. Um, I think, somewhat maybe counterintuitively, that the most important place to teach the Rorschach is to undergraduates. And I think that because if we don't inform them about the measure, and the evidence base for the measure, they will be informed by sources like textbooks that give a very inaccurate and biased picture of the Rorschach. So I consider that to be in some ways my most important teaching, at the undergraduate level.
That's very important, especially because we have found that there's a lot of misinformation in media. Like there's people who have, used the cars for all kinds of things that present them in YouTube, they present them in several websites in a way that's so misinformed and almost, will draw people away from it because it just will present something if they don't really know about it. It will appear as something that's just too, magical or something that will not even be psychological or empirical.
Yeah, oh, totally. And as it happens, and this is just a coincidence, I happen to be in the section of my upper level undergraduate class where we're dealing with the Rorschach now, literally now. I devote 3 class periods to the Rorschach in this undergraduate class. And we've had our first 2, and we're going to have our third tomorrow. And of course, I go over the syllabus at the beginning of the semester. And, when I told them that, mid-semester we're going to be reaching the Rorschach, um, I got a lot of kind of grimaces from the back of the room. They've all taken introductory psych, and you know what they hear in introductory psych. So people are looking at me like, why are you wasting our time at the Rorschach? So we started this 2 classes ago. I've had about 2 hours of, to talk to them about it. Everybody is on board. Those people who were like sneering and grimacing at me back in September are asking questions, their hands are up. You just have to, if you provide people with the history of the measure, the context, Rorschach's original purpose for the scale, and then how it's evolved over the years, and and they come away understanding that it's a very evidence-based test with actuarial scoring. And so now, what I feel good about, we're sending now 25 people out into the world who may not all become psychologists, but they're going to have a more accurate and balanced understanding of this measure.
Mhm, mhm. And what about at the level of graduate students? Do
I'm
you still see that they are just as engaged and passionate about continuing to learn it, right? Because it is always something that we're always learning about it, a very complex instrument.
yeah, I'm lucky in that Adelphi is a psychodynamically oriented department program. And so there's certainly some variability among the doctoral students, but in general, that's a receptive audience. So they're easy to talk to in that regard. Um, and not only my students, but other people's students as well. We have a number of doctoral students who are doing dissertations on the Rorschach and other performance-based tests. So
Mhm,
I get to be on a lot of dissertation committees. That's fun.
mhm. That's terrific. Uh, and how do you said that you like to have a performance uh, instrument in your multi-method evaluations and to recommend them. And what are your other favorite projective or performance instruments that you have utilized or that you have taught?
I think the other instrument I would feel comfortable using at this point is the TAT. And that is not to say there are not other good performance-based instruments. And of course we hear about them at conferences and but the TAT2 has such a history and an evidence base. And with some of the newer scoring systems like Scores, that's another measure I feel comfortable both using and teaching.
Mhm, mhm,
You, you know, and I guess the other thing that helps to in reaching students is that in my classes we talk a lot about the limitations of self-reports. And that's
mhm,
not a critique of any individual measure, not at all. But what I mean by that is we talk about the limitations in people's ability to introspect, and then limitations in their ability to report accurately on what they see when they look within themselves. And so that creates good context for contrasting performance-based test data with self-report test data. What I'm trying to do, both in my teaching and in my research, is not to favor one instrument over another instrument, although you know that personally in my heart I'm kind of a Rorschach person, but to in the world, I'm not trying to favor one instrument over another, but to talk about what we can get from self-report measures and what we can't get, and then what we can get from a measure like the Rorschach and what we can't get, and how those things fit together and complement each other and fill gaps, right?
Right.
That's what
And
I'm.
those two types of information are just equally valuable because it is important to know how individuals see themselves and what is it that they think about, their functioning and so
Right. I mean, it's absolutely crucial to understand how a person perceives and presents themselves to you. That's hugely important information, and then we need to go further.
yeah,
That's
exactly
all.
right. Yeah. Any interest in using attachment instruments since you have really been talking about, the attachment, detachment,
Uh, which instruments?
attachment instruments like interviews that have to do with attachment?
I do teach clinical interviewing in some of my classes. And I haven't done much in that area myself. Um, the other area that I'm interested in, and this relates to what we're doing these days in dependency and detachment, is you may know that about 20 years ago, um, and this was in the context of actually trying to distinguish unhealthy expressions of interpersonal dependency from healthy expressions of interpersonal dependency, we developed a measure, the relationship profile test, that assesses, it has three subscales. It assesses unhealthy overdependence, healthy dependency, and dysfunctional detachment. Ultimately, that's what led me over into detachment too. But we're actually doing quite a bit with the relationship profile test at this point. Probably the most interesting work right now is cross-cultural. We're trying to understand how dependency and detachment profiles differ across cultures,
Yeah.
across genders as well, and also within a culture, in subgroups within a culture. These studies too are very student driven, and I'm thrilled for that.
That's very exciting. I can't wait to hear about the results of this. We all have our own beliefs about the cultural issues in relation to the interpersonal distance and closeness and detachment.
Well, I'm amazed at how impactful those studies are. People are very interested in them. I get emails from around the world. And in fact, I'm giving a talk well, I'm not going, but I'm giving a Zoom talk in Poland next month. And I'm like completely honored that the measure, the relationship profile test, has been translated into either 7 or 8 languages. I lost count at this point. But Spanish, Russian, Japanese, Korean, Czech. I'm leaving things out, but it's great.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. So my last question is about how would you like to see the Rorschach evolve in the future? That is, where should we be headed as we seek to enhance the measure and spread the word about its validity, its importance.
Oh yeah. I think we're in a good time, by the way. I think the Rorschach is gaining in influence these days, which is quite a contrast to 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So that's nice to see. Some of the most interesting work I think going on these days uh, involves delineating the neuropsychological correlates and the cognitive correlates and underpinnings of Rorschach responses. There's great work being done in Italy, I know at this time. South America, Greg Meyer and Joni Mahura are doing, wonderful things in that area as well. Uh, and so that to me is very exciting. And it's also kind of fun that it circles right back to what Rorschach's original intent was. I mean, he really couched a lot of his writing in terms of the neuropsychological underpinnings of Rorschach responses. And then we lost that for like 100 years, and now it's coming back. So that to me is really important. The other thing I think that I would like to see happen in the next in several years is for us, clinicians, psychologists who are interested in the Rorschach, to do more outreach to our non-clinical colleagues, to talk to social psychologists, to talk to developmental psychologists, because we have a lot to learn from them about the processes, the interpersonal processes, the developmental processes that help shape Rorschach data, and and we have much to teach them too.
Mhm.
And uh, one of the things I found, and it was surprising to me, um, but not anymore, is that people outside of psychology have some interest in the Rorschach. I've been approached by anthropologists on the faculty, cultural anthropologists who are interested in using the Rorschach in their work and have used the Rorschach in their work, and also by political scientists
Ah,
who are in moving forward in that direction. So to the extent that we can like foster connections, both with other psychological subfields, other psychological specialties, I think we're going to be helping ourselves. We're going to be helping psychology, contributing. And to the extent that we can look outside of psychology and connect with these other disciplines, that will, I think that's an important task for the next decade
mm.
in Rorschach work.
And do you think that in these times when there's the ability to have computerized personality assessment instruments, computerized interpretations, now that we're having this boom with AI, who knows, they probably can write our reports and all that. Do you think that people, students, new psychologists, and people from other disciplines as well, still have an interest in going beyond that, in thinking, right? In using their mind, in getting into more in-depth, complex ways of looking at personality.
I think so, and I hope so. I hope that people, I hope that we're able to move beyond model method assessment and all of us collectively move toward a more nuanced understanding of personality assessment and of personality in general. Since you mentioned AI, will tell you, and I don't think I'm giving away any secrets. Um, there's a student at Adelphi now, not my student, who is trying to use AI to develop a TAT scoring system that will get the humans out of the whole business.
Oh, well, very interesting, very
We'll
interesting.
see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see people being very interested in studying, in looking things in depth and looking at the nuance, and exploring more about the instrument and other projective instruments and other areas, of personality that perhaps we were not as interested before. We thought we will have this general test and now we know everything. And now we know that no, we don't, we really need focus and concentrate in the areas that are of interest to the question that we may have.
Yeah. Well, the longer, at least in my experience, the longer I work as a psychologist, the more I realize how much I don't know,
Mhm.
which is good.
Yep,
You
it's
know, when
good.
you're 25, you think you've solved it all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No,
So it doesn't let you get bored.
no, it's wonderful, actually. And that's the other great thing about working with students. I mean, It's great to see 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds. That's my favorite part of the job.
It's very energizing, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to tell us today?
Oh boy, let me think. No, I mean, these have been great questions. I guess I would just say this is as I look back on my career so far, and it's been 40 years, I am both amazed at the people that I've been able to meet and honored by the kindness that has been shown to me by people like Irv Weiner, who was editor of the Journal of Personality Assessment when I submitted my first Rorschach paper and accepted it. And I, I never would have thought that this would happen, but ultimately Irv and I ended up collaborating. This is amazing. This is amazing to me. So the kindness of the assessment community is heartwarming.
Mhm, mhm. I agree. Yeah, that's a wonderful thing that also keep us going and really still interested in the field and passionate about it.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope
Thank-
we'll be, we'll be able to do a follow-up interview 40 years from now. We'll see what's changed.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was a
Well,
pleasure talking to you.
it's always great chatting with you, and thank you so much for inviting me.